Some Big Ten teams look great. Other Big Ten teams didn't look so great. And we're looking ahead to big-time Week 2 matchups. This is Big Nation. Let's get it rolling.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Don't overreact to Week 1. Don't overreact to Week 1. Been hearing a lot of that on the Twitter sphere. Been hearing a lot of that in the YouTube comments. But here's what I want to say to that statement. Yes, we don't overreact to Week 1. Absolutely. But we don't overreact to Week 1. But we also don't forget. And we also don't ignore what happened in Week 1. We don't just push aside what we saw with our own eyeballs. You got to find a good balance between the two. Welcome in to Big Nation 5. I'm Big Ten Ted. You can find me on social media at Big Ten Ted over there on Twitter, Big Ten Ted on Spotify, the audio platform over there, and of course right here on YouTube for those of you watching on video. Make sure you hit subscribe so you know when Big Nation is coming to you. We got a lot to talk about today. What's on the docket? What's on the game plan? The two maybe most impressive performances in the Big Ten, I think without a doubt, they were the two most impressive performances in the Big Ten. USC's win over a top 15 Bayou Bengals squad in Las Vegas, and of course that domination by the Penn State Nittany Lions in Morgantown. Can those two teams, Penn State and USC, can they disrupt things on the road to Indianapolis? We're going to be talking about those two squads as far as the postseason is concerned, that one postseason game that we do have here within the Big Ten Conference. Now, for every USC, for every Penn State, there is a Wisconsin, and there's a Michigan. There is a group of teams within the Big Ten that have different levels of concern. Some of them have low concern, medium concern, high concern. We're going to break down all of those concern levels as well. And we're looking ahead, of course, to week number 2. We got to keep on churning. We got to keep on going down the tracks, man. We're going to be previewing Cy-Hawk, Iowa, and Iowa State, Kinnick Stadium. That's 3:30 Eastern on CBS. And the big noon matchup, the Texas Longhorns coming to the big house to take on the Michigan Wolverines. We're going to break down those two games in the second half of this show as well. Before I really get into the meat and potatoes, there's a handful of things that I really want to talk about. Big shout out to two specific teams. I'm not going to be talking about them a ton in this specific show, but I wanted to make sure that they got their flowers in this specific show. How about Hudson Card and the Purdue Boilermakers, man? Video game type of numbers, that accuracy, that efficiency, right? I've been saying it for, I think, over a year now. If Hudson Card can get some protection from this offensive line, he's a quarterback that can sling the football. He's a quarterback that can certainly move it up and down the field. And how about the Illinois Fighting Illini? Man, I think Luke Altmaier's got that confidence in his head throwing the football down the field. Pat Bryant as well looked really good in that Week 1 victory over Eastern Illinois. So I wanted to make sure I got both of those squads their shout-outs here to start things off as well. Now, naturally, when the Big Ten gets a big win over the SEC, there's a lot of talk about Big Ten. There's a lot of talk about SEC. And I wanted to bring up a tweet here from Tom Fernelli of CBS Sports, also the Cover 3 podcast as well. Maybe some things in this tweet a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right? He's got a very good sense of humor. He's got a very fun personality over there on the Cover 3 podcast as well. But, you know, when you look at recent history between the Big Ten and the SEC, and there's a reason, I think, why the SEC, everybody claims SEC bias, and the benefit of the doubt always seems to go the way of the Southeastern Conference. When you win as much as they have over the years, when you've won as much big games and national titles as they have over the years, you generally start to lean that way. Now, you can argue whether that's right. You can argue whether that's wrong, and we can have that discussion. But I said it prior to the Rose Bowl, prior to Michigan and Alabama. If the Big Ten wants to get that benefit of the doubt that the SEC receives, you need to win playoff games. You need to win big non-conference games and check and check. Now, there's maybe a little bit of pick and choose in this tweet from Tom. You know, you look at some of those maybe games that don't mean as much at the end of the year, those bowl games. We love bowl games, but, you know, opt-outs, of course, contribute to this where it's not the full roster and full teams. You know, in this tweet, he's not including Penn State and Ole Miss. You know, he's not including Iowa and Tennessee, right, at the end of this last season as well. But when it comes to those big non-conference games, when it comes to those playoff games, you see it on the tweet. For those of you listening on podcast, Tom says, fun fact, in games that matter, and he's talking regular season and playoff, the Big Ten, as currently constructed, has won 3 straight against the Southeastern Conference. Of course, USC beating LSU, Michigan over Alabama, Washington over Texas in last year's college football playoff. And he kind of jokes at the end saying, is the SEC dead? The SEC is not dead. The SEC is certainly a big-time power in college football, but the momentum you can see is certainly going the way of the Big Ten Conference. And if they continue to win more of these games, like Tom says, regular season and playoff, if they continue to win more of these games, hopefully, and you got to think, the benefit of the doubt is going to go the way of the Big Ten Conference. Now, a lot of success in week number 1 for the Big Ten. It wasn't just USC beating LSU and Penn State's dominant win over West Virginia. It was 17 out of the 18 teams, and one team came up on the short end of the stick, and it was the one game that I was at on Thursday night when Minnesota took on the North Carolina Tar Heels. You see it here in the tweet. Big Ten 17-1 this past weekend. And for those of you listening on podcast, the Big Ten went 17-1. I tweeted, only Minnesota fell in week 1. I apologize. Drake and Kesich missing 2 field goals for the Golden Gophers. But here's to hoping Minnesota is going to respond these next 2 weeks and get ready to go by the time the Iowa Hawkeyes come in to Huntington Bank Stadium to take on the Minnesota Golden Gophers. But that is an impressive start to this season for the Big Ten Conference. Now, I predicted them to go 18-0. They came oh so close to getting to that point. 17-1, still a pretty darn good start in gaining that confidence and momentum for a majority of these teams to start the college football season. All right, it's time to really dive into the meat and potatoes of this particular program. The 2 most impressive wins in the Big Ten Conference this weekend. Penn State's dominance in Morgantown against West Virginia maybe took them a little bit longer than they anticipated with the weather delay. And, of course, the USC Trojans in Las Vegas defeating the SEC's LSU Tigers. And it wasn't only in the Big Ten. I thought these were 2 of the more impressive performances in all of college football. You get outside the Big Ten bubble here for just a minute, and I think there's really 2 other performances that stand out to me. Georgia's thumping of Clemson. Now, it's not really surprising. Georgia is just an impressive program. They're probably the best program in all of college football right now. So that result isn't necessarily surprising, but it is still very impressive doing what they did to a top 15 Clemson squad over there as well. And then you look at the Miami Hurricanes, man, going into the sweaty swamp, and what they were able to do, Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, Simeon Barrow, some of these players that they've brought in, I think this is a really good Miami team. I think there's a shot that maybe Miami could pull away in the ACC. You look at Virginia Tech losing to Vanderbilt. You look at what Florida State has done going 0-2 to start the season. And Clemson, Miami might be like old times in the late 90s and early 2000s where they're kind of looking down at everybody else in their conference right now. But getting back into that Big Ten bubble, I think a big reason why Penn State and USC were so impressive in week number 1, and maybe this is what this segment is all about, and maybe why they could be Big Ten championship disruptors on that path to Indianapolis, is because of their quarterbacks. When you get outside of Dillon Gabriel, I think Penn State and USC have the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. And there's always been, since last season, there's always been this talking point about the accuracy of Drew Aller. He shows it sometimes, he doesn't show it other times. But he looked really confident in that game against West Virginia. And he's got a big arm. Like, he's got the arm strength to push the ball down the field. And we know that's what Penn State has needed to do. They needed to push the football down the field. And you saw him with some of that confidence. A little shaky at first, but once he kind of got his feet and his head under him a little bit, you saw exactly what Drew Aller can do. And if Drew Aller can take that next step up to be a great Big Ten quarterback and be a top 10 to top 15 quarterback nationally, this is a Penn State program that can also take that next step up. And, what is the step where they're currently at? The step of where they're at right now is a top 10 program and a college football playoff contender. That next step up naturally is a disruptor to Ohio State and Oregon, both of them getting into Indianapolis and the Big Ten championship game as well. And of course, the quarterback for the USC Trojans, Miller Moss. No moment was too big for Miller Moss in Las Vegas. In just his second career start, this kid had ice water in his veins, man. And this is what I love, because we're going to take a look at USC's schedule here in just a moment. They've got big games. Everybody talked about their schedule at the beginning of the year, maybe why they wouldn't be as successful. Miller Moss is going to be in a lot of big games, and to get that out of the way early against LSU and to be able to make those big throws in key spots, that offside call, hit it to Jacoby Lane for the touchdown to tie the game, you really saw what he can do in crunch time situations. He's going to need to be able to do that, because if USC wants to be a Big Ten championship disruptor, he's going to need to make big-time throws in big-time spots as well. We know all about the USC offense, and I think one reason why they could, we are not overreacting, by the way. We are not saying Penn State and USC are contenders to get to Indianapolis. I'm saying they could be a threat. They could disrupt the path for both Ohio State and Oregon, for both of the Bucks and the Ducks to get to Indianapolis. But of course, that defense has, through one game, we've seen it. Of course, that game coming up against Michigan in a couple of weeks is going to tell us a lot about where USC really is, if they can put out a duplicate performance against a really good football team. But if this defense can play like they did in Las Vegas against LSU, and we know all about Lincoln Riley and what he can do on the offensive side of the ball, that is a combination. You stir it together, you pull it out of the oven, and maybe, just maybe, you're playing in Indianapolis. All I'm saying is that is a really good combination for the USC Trojans, and it is a dangerous combination potentially for the rest of the Big Ten. So we know, based on what we saw in week one, remember, we're not overreacting, but we're not ignoring what we saw in week one. Based on what we saw with our eyes, these are two teams that at the very least can contend for that college football playoff spot, but we're talking about being disruptors to get in to a Big Ten championship spot, potentially, maybe with some tiebreakers mixed in there, get into a Big Ten championship spot. Now, the big test before October 12th is going to come for the USC Trojans, because Penn State has a very favorable schedule before we get to that big-time weekend on October 12th. Let's talk about it for USC. Pretender or contender, right? This is something that this last result against LSU is a result that piqued a lot of people's interest. It piqued my interest that maybe this team can be a contender. They are going to be an even bigger contender if they can go on the road into Ann Arbor in a couple of weeks and beat the Michigan Wolverines. And the schedule actually plays in their favor. They play Utah State, they have a bye, and then they go to Ann Arbor. Michigan has a game against Texas, of course, here this week, and they don't have a bye before they play the USC Trojans as well. So that plays into the favor of USC. I look at what Michigan's offensive line looked like, where Fresno State was able to go nose-to-nose with them for a majority of that game. And then I looked how USC performed against what I think is a better offensive line than Michigan in the LSU Tigers. USC will not take on a better offensive line than what they saw against the LSU Tigers. So I think that favors in to how they approach that game against Michigan. And if they can keep this Michigan run game in check, and they can at least create a stalemate at the line of scrimmage, force Michigan to beat you through the air, and then they just do enough against this Michigan defense, this vaunted Michigan defense, there's certainly a path to victory for the USC Trojans over the Michigan Wolverines. I think that is almost a must-win for USC. If they want to be that dark horse to get to Indianapolis, you need to beat Michigan. Even with the college football playoff, even with their CFP spot, even with the win over LSU, if they can back that up with a win against Michigan, no matter what happens the rest of the year, they play Penn State later on in the year. They play Nebraska later on in the year. They play Notre Dame a little bit later on in the year. Having wins not at the Coliseum against the LSU Tigers and against the Michigan Wolverines, that could be one of the better resumes in college football at that point in time. So I think that they will be a legitimate contender in my eyes. They're really, really close. I certainly think they can be in that playoff category. But they can, I think, be in that Big Ten championship type of category at least, or at least be a contender for that. We know Oregon and Ohio State have stacked rosters. But USC, with a little bit of help, maybe with some tiebreakers, a win over Michigan will really show me that this team is for real this year in 2024. So let's talk about October 12th, why don't we? That has become the weekend. I talked about it a few weeks ago that says, hey, November 2nd is where the men are going to be separated from the boys. And that's still going to be a pretty darn big weekend, right? That particular weekend, Oregon plays Michigan, Ohio State plays Penn State. That still will probably determine who plays in Indianapolis at the end of the season. But October 12th is maybe the greatest day in college football history, the greatest slate of games, regular season-wise, in college football history, maybe. And really, when you take a look at this, you've got Penn State going on the road to USC. And I want to talk about this from the Penn State perspective because, you know, ever since 2016, when they won that Big Ten championship, they just haven't been able to get it done on a consistent basis, and most years at all, against both the Michigan Wolverines and the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, there's no Michigan on the schedule this year, which is why a lot of people thought, hey, Penn State, they can go 11-1. Maybe they can get into the Big Ten championship game with that record. If not, they'll still be a very high seed in the college football playoff. But they've got a new Michigan on the schedule. I think USC going on the road to the Coliseum is that new Michigan. That is a new type of big game that James Franklin has to win. I think this year, whether it's USC or whether it's Ohio State, James Franklin, you got to win one of these big games. You got to win big games, I think, eventually. If Penn State wants to get to that next level as a college football program, they looked really good in week number 1, like they could get to that next level. I talked about Drew Aller and his talent, and if he can develop into the quarterback we all know he can be, then they can make that jump to the next level. But you got to get big wins over really good teams. Going on the road to the Coliseum, that is almost guaranteed to be the CBS game because it was leaked by Joe Klatt. Ohio State and Oregon is going to be the Big Ten Saturday night game on NBC. So that is almost guaranteed to be the CBS game this particular year. What a weekend of college football that will be. And these two games, along with November 2nd, will tell us a lot about who's the leader in the clubhouse to get to Indianapolis at the end of the season. Now, if both of these teams want to be disruptors, if in the Big Ten championship picture, if one of them wants to get into Indianapolis, whether it's over Ohio State or over Oregon, you got to look at the schedule after this date. And I want to start first with the Penn State Nittany Lions when I really start to talk about this. Of course, on November 2nd, you got that big game against the Ohio State Buckeyes right now. But outside of that, it's a very favorable schedule. Arguably their toughest opponent outside of Ohio State, they get them at home in a whiteout, and that's the Washington Huskies, who I expect to be ranked here this week. You know, going to Wisconsin looked a little bit shaky out there in week number 1. But then you have other teams on the schedule like Maryland, Minnesota, and Purdue, all teams that Penn State should be able to handle. So really, what does it come down to for Penn State to be a Big Ten championship contender? It comes down to winning one of two games, USC or Ohio State. They need to find a way to win one of those games. Now, if you lose them, you still feel pretty good at 10-2 that you can get into the college football playoff. But if you want to take it one step further, Penn State, you need to win one of those football games. Let's look at it from the USC perspective. Now, we know this is a little bit of a tougher schedule. We're going to push Notre Dame a little bit to the side since it's not a Big Ten game. But you look at this schedule, okay? Before this schedule, they've got Michigan, they've got Penn State, and then you've got Nebraska down the stretch as well. And don't sleep on November 2nd as well, where USC travels to the greatest setting in college football to take on the Washington Huskies. Beginning of the year, I predicted four losses for USC. I predicted Notre Dame, I predicted Michigan, I predicted Penn State, and this was the fourth, the upset at the University of Washington. So I think that's a little bit of a sneaky game in there as well. USC over the last 10 years or so hasn't fared well against the Huskies from Seattle as well. So, but if they are able to beat Michigan, and then we'll see what happens against Penn State, you look at this slate the rest of the way, it really comes down to that Nebraska game. Now, which one of these teams, based on these schedules, has a better chance to be the disruptor? Personally, I think it's Penn State. I think they have a little bit more of a favorable schedule down the stretch. Washington and Nebraska in back-to-back weeks, I think that can certainly be a little bit tricky for the USC Trojans as well. But USC, they need to prove it, I think, against the University of Michigan. If they prove it in that game, I can certainly see a path for them to continue that momentum, to continue building that, and if things bounce a certain way, maybe, just maybe, this is a USC team that is playing in Indianapolis at the end of the year. Now, not every team can be like USC and Penn State. Not every single team right now is saying, hey, based on week one, we can be a disruptor in the Big Ten Conference. There are a handful of teams in the Big Ten Conference that I think have some concerns based on their week one performances. Now, we've been saying it at the top of the show. Now in the middle of the show, we're probably going to say it towards the end of the show as well. We don't overreact to week one, but we don't ignore what happened in week one, and we follow up on what our eyeballs tell us. So let's dive right into it. The concern level for a group of football teams. I want to start with teams at the high level of concern. Let's start first with the UCLA Bruins, man. You know, I maybe used a little bit of a harsher term on Twitter than maybe I needed to when describing this offensive line for the UCLA Bruins, but it's got to get better. If Hawaii is able to do that to your front and disrupt Ethan Garbers the way they did, imagine what's going to happen when you face some Big Ten teams. When you face LSU out of conference a little bit later on in this season, they got to get it together. They got to patch those holes, no question about that. If that offensive line for UCLA, if they play like that the rest of the season, I don't know if they're going to win 4 games all year. I don't. And then Ethan Garbers was inaccurate. He turned the football over 2 times. Okay, I was high on Ethan Garbers at quarterback and this wide receiving core this season. And I still think that they can get there, but they need to turn this thing around quick, because if they continue these issues, we know they've got a daunting middle of the schedule. You know, Oregon is in there, Penn State is in there, LSU is in there. If this continues and then you face that schedule, man, you could be pretty beat up physically. You could be beat up mentally. So Deshaun Foster, Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator, they need to find a way to figure this thing out now, very quickly, because it was not good. It was not good at Hawaii in game number 1. Let's talk about the Michigan State Spartans. I also got them on high alert. I kind of considered them for medium concern as well. But Aiden Childs, man, you just got to protect the football. Like, this kid's a gunslinger. And this is also a note to Brian Lindgren, their offensive coordinator. If the deep ball doesn't work the first 7 or 8 times, let's just maybe work on completing some short to medium passing concepts as well. They were going to live and die by. They were going to make sure that they hit that deep ball down the field eventually, and it just didn't work out. He's got to be able to protect the football. And here's the thing about Michigan State. I really like the running tandem. I saw some really good things from Kalen Rich-Adams in that season opener against Florida Atlantic, but look at their schedule and what's coming up for Michigan State. They got to go to to Maryland this week, and then look what Boston College was able to do against Florida State. All of a sudden, if you lose to Maryland, which that's what I predicted in the beginning of the season, and I find myself staying with that based on what both of these teams showed in week number 1, was very impressed with Billy Edwards over there at Maryland. But if they fall to Maryland and then they come back, they beat Prairie View A&M, they're 2-1. Now you go on the road to Boston College, and then you look at that stretch that's coming up, these next 4 games. This is a team entering the month of November that could be staring 2-6 in the face. And then where is your team at that point? Where is your team mentally at that point? Where is Aiden Childs at that specific point in time where you have toss-up games against the Indianas, against the Purdues, against the Rutgers, against some of those teams like that? So I think they got to figure it out. There's an opportunity that Michigan State could be 4-0 and they could flip this thing around. But this game against Maryland, I think, is going to really tell us a lot. And considering what this schedule looks like down the road for Michigan State, I think they got to get it righted, and they got to get it righted quickly. Protect the football. You can't turn this in to the team like it was last year where they continued to turn the football over. I want to get to some teams with some medium concern. And let's talk about Wisconsin. This was an offense that played really within 10 to 12 yards of the line of scrimmage. It looked like old Wisconsin, just in different formations, just out of the shotgun, right? This is a team that did fairly well running the football. Tawee Walker, you look at Ches Malusi, okay, that looked pretty good. But when it comes to Tyler Van Dyke, he threw a couple of balls that should have probably been interceptions, and they didn't really stretch the football down the field at all. And I think that makes things a lot easier for defenses to really come up and defend. So they need to find a way, whether it's Vinny Anthony out there, whether it's Will Pauling kind of working out of the slot, Bryson Green. They need to find somebody to be able to stretch the field. South Dakota is a top 5 FCS team. Just be aware. Just be aware. I'm not overly concerned. I'm not panicking per se. We're not pushing the panic button. We're not overreacting to what happened in week 1 in Madison. But you looked at the defensive side of the football. When they lost James Thompson Jr. for the season on a already thin defensive line, that was fairly concerning. And then what I saw at times where Western Michigan was able to establish their girth and their run game at the line of scrimmage, Alabama's going to come into Madison in a few weeks. And they got one of the best offensive lines in the country. They might be able to run the ball right at the Badgers all afternoon long. So you got to get some things fixed and figured out before Alabama comes into Madison for that big noon game as well. Now, Minnesota is an interesting case study because the Golden Gophers did not have Darius Taylor in that week 1 game. And I said it in my reaction from Huntington Bank Stadium. I think Darius Taylor, getting him back is going to be important, but it's not going to fix every issue on your football team, specifically defensively. Okay, and then on the offensive line as well. But let's talk about defense a little bit. Some missed tackles in that football game against North Carolina. They found pressure at certain points in time, but I think when you look at maybe some of these teams on the schedule, they need to get better in the back end of this defense as well, back there in that secondary. And then you look back at the offensive side, they need to get in a rhythm. Max Brosmer, kind of like he did on that last drive where he started to build some confidence. You need to figure it out. The positive thing for Minnesota is that you came a missed field goal short of beating North Carolina. We don't know how good North Carolina is going to be right now. But the good thing is you turn it around against Rhode Island. You turn it around against Nevada. You get Darius Taylor back, and now you get Iowa, coming to your place. All of a sudden, you can flip this narrative pretty quick. If Max Brosmer builds some confidence, boy, these receivers need to get open. Yeah, I think you need more than just Daniel Jackson on the outside. That's also a big level of concern. So hopefully somebody can emerge, whether it's Elijah Spencer or Lemeki Brockington, here within the next few weeks as well. So that's something that needs to be working on. We're not hitting the panic button yet because Minnesota could easily rattle off 3 straight. They beat Iowa. All of a sudden, you're feeling pretty good about yourself. Once again, Michigan. Offensive line, I don't think was maybe as good as some people thought it was coming out of fall camp. Fresno State was able to do a really good job pushing back at them up front. The run game was contained for the most part. I know Khalil Mullins got over 90 yards in that game, but I think the concern for them is at quarterback. Okay, we're not panicking, but we look around and say, man, maybe we underappreciated J.J. McCarthy a little bit, because there were times last year when Michigan run the ball, but you could have J.J. McCarthy on a play fake rollout. He could put it on a dime 20, 30 yards down the field. He could stretch the defense, and that opened up the Michigan offense to do so many different things. You don't have that this year. They're playing kind of a lot like that Wisconsin offense, right? Within 10, 12, 15 yards of the line of scrimmage. You know, Colston Loveland is really your top target going down the field. Can you separate against some teams with better secondaries? That's going to be the question, because the game plan against Michigan is fairly simple. Score enough points against a really, really good defense, crowd the box, stop the run, make the quarterback beat you. Michigan needs to be more diverse than that if they want to be a college football playoff team by the end of the season. I'm going to finish things off with a low level of concern. Of course, Oregon, right, when Idaho, now Idaho is the 7th-ranked team in the FCS, but Oregon's the 3rd-ranked team in FBS. So it should not be that close, even though Idaho is that highly ranked at their level of football. But this offensive line, they need to get it figured out. They need to gel together a little bit better, and they just need to play better. And Oregon needs to be able to finish drives. Like, you look at the stat line that Dylan Gabriel put up in week number 1, and I'm flipping back and forth between this game, and I'm seeing him make some plays in the middle of the field, but you need to have that killer instinct to finish drives. Sure up the offensive line, Oregon, you're still going to be an elite football team. So low level of concern. If we see games like that against Boise State, against Oregon State, you might move up a concern level, maybe to the medium level. Northwestern, look, it did not surprise me that was a one-possession game with Miami of Ohio, the defending MAC champions over there. But there were some good things that I did see in this game. I thought the defense played really well, limiting the Redhawks to just 6 points in this particular matchup. I thought Mike Wright made some good throws at some points in time. This is low concern, even though Miami of Ohio went toe-to-toe with them. It's low concern because that's what I expected it to happen. I didn't have super high expectations for Northwestern this season. I like what I see on the defensive side of the ball. The offense, I think, as we get further into the schedule, is going to need to be more dynamic if the Northwestern Wildcats want to be able to make a bowl game. It's week 1. We don't overreact, but we don't ignore what we saw on the field. These teams just need to shore some things up as we get into the meat of the Big Ten schedule. Coming up on the other side, we're shifting our focus to week 2, previewing Iowa State and Michigan, Texas. That after these big facts. It is the game of the week in the Big Ten, and of course, probably the game of the week in college football as well. The Texas Longhorns coming into Michigan Stadium, coming to Ann Arbor, come into the Big House to take on the Michigan Wolverines, a top 10 battle. This one is going to be a whole lot of fun. All right, let's dive into it. Let's really start to break down this game, because I think week 1 went as expected for Texas. They threw the ball really well. They moved the ball up and down the field, a lot of production, a lot of points. But then you look at Michigan against Fresno State, and I'm not sure it went as expected for Wolverine fans. You saw this offensive line. There were returns coming out of fall camp that said, hey, I know we lose what we lose up front on the O-line, but this offensive line, I think, is going to be better than a lot of people think. Fresno State went nose to nose with this Michigan offensive front. Look, this run game, it was fine. It was certainly not what we're used to seeing from the Michigan Wolverines. Khalil Mullins led the Wolverines in rushing with just over 90 yards in this particular football game. Donovan Edwards did not get much of anything on the ground, and that's where I kind of want to start, because we know what Michigan needs to do to succeed. They need to be great up front on the offensive line, and they need to be able to run the football. I emphasize need a little bit more because you rewind back to last year and the year before with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback. Of course, the run game and establishing that push on the offensive line, of course, that was important. That's the identity of Michigan football, after all. But J.J. McCarthy could save them a little bit. If they didn't get it going on the first couple of downs, you get into a 3rd and 7, a 3rd and 8, JJ can rip it down the field for a 15 to a 25-yard gain. He can stretch the field, and I think that helped out so much more things in the run game. They don't have that threat. Michigan's throw game and really Michigan's offense as a whole against Fresno State was working within a 10, 12, 15-yard box within the line of scrimmage. You didn't see a lot of those J.J. McCarthy rollouts where he can stretch it down the field and get it to a guy like Colston Loveland. You didn't see that. Okay, I think maybe the reason the quarterback battle really took so long is I'm not sure if one of these guys really pulled away from the other. You didn't see someone really take control of this job because I'm not sure if either of these guys are ultra great options right now for the Michigan Wolverines. I think they're fine options. I think Michigan can win some games with Alex Orji or Davis Warren. Davis Warren, of course, is the guy right now, but Alex Orji certainly saw some time also in this offense as well. But they need more production because if I'm Texas coming into this football game and I look at that Fresno State film, I'm like, all right, this is simple. Let's load the box, make the quarterbacks beat us. And Michigan has to provide that threat, whether it's getting the ball up the seam to someone like Colston Loveland or getting your other wide receivers involved. They need to have that threat. Otherwise, Texas is going to be able to load the box, and Khalil Mullins or Donovan Edwards, okay, if they can't run it ultra effectively against Fresno State, what happens when you bring a more talented defense like the Texas Longhorns into town? I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So a key for Michigan in this game, you need some type of downfield passing threat. Okay, you didn't get a lot of it against Fresno State. Maybe they were holding some things back for this particular game against Texas. It didn't look that way necessarily to me, but this is a team that needs to have that balance down the field, I think, in order to really compete with Texas in this game. I really thought coming into this season that, especially with the injuries at running back for Texas, their top two running backs went down to season-ending injuries. I thought, okay, this is a Texas team. They're going to rear back. They're going to throw the football. If Michigan can get pressure on Quinn Ewers, establish that smash-mouth football that Sharon Moore wants to do at the line of scrimmage on offense, maybe this is a formula where Michigan can win. But if we saw what we saw from this offensive line last week, this week against Texas, I think it's a pretty good challenge. And I think there's a reason why Texas is 6.5-point favorites on the road at Michigan. Let's talk about when Texas has the football. Of course, Quinn Ewers, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. There's a reason why he is Mr. Fansville right now. There's a reason why he's in that type of spotlight, because he is one of the very best quarterbacks in the country right now. Now, I know you bring in a good amount of transfer receivers. Isaiah Bond, of course, is the guy that everybody looks to. But there's guys that have had production at other schools. There's guys across this formation for Texas that I think maybe could give Michigan some problems. I think the key for Michigan is to slow down Quinn Ewers. You got to get pressure. Wink Martindale, what have we heard about him all off season long? This guy loves to bring pressure. And I've got a feeling that Michigan is going to have to bring pressure outside of their front four. Now, that's a big-time matchup for me because I think Michigan has one of the very best defensive lines in the country. And we just talked about last week when we were previewing USC and LSU. On 3 in their rankings, rated LSU as the number 1 offensive line in the country. You know who's right behind them at number 2? The Texas Longhorns. They've got a great left tackle in Kelvin Banks. Jake Majors at center has 41 career starts with the Burnt Orange, so there's a lot of experience up front. That's going to be, I think, one of the battles. Okay, a lot of people are going to look towards this flashy passing attack of Texas. Can Michigan run the football? Things like that. Those are things that a lot of people are going to focus on. But this is Big Ten Ted after all, right? When we talk about the Big Ten Conference, we talk about those battles in the trenches. I think Michigan is going to have to get pressure with their front four up front. They have to, because I think if you start to bring some of the guys from some of these other levels of the defense, I got a feeling Wink Martindale is going to do that anyway. But when you start to do that, I think you get some of these one-on-one matchups back there in the secondary. And if Quinn Ewers can get rid of the football quickly before the pressure gets there, you know, outside of Will Johnson, these matchups may favor the University of Texas. Michigan's got to get home. They got to get home. They got to get into the face of Quinn Ewers. That is a huge key for me, because if that's able to happen and they get the timing off of this Texas offense, and Texas, they didn't run the ball all that much in week number 1. And like I said before, their top 2 running backs are out with injury. This is and it's a Steve Sarkisian offense and football team. They're going to look to throw the football around. So, if they can keep this passing game in check, I think that gives Michigan a chance throughout this football game as well. But they need to be able to get pressure to get this offense off their rhythm as well. Now, Texas's defensive front, right? They don't have T'Vondre Sweat. They don't have Byron Murphy, right? Those 2 NFL draft picks, first-round type of guys in the middle of this defensive line. It's good. I think it's solid. I still think Michigan is going to be challenged up front, but this run game is almost going to have a little bit of a dual purpose based on what I just said with the Texas Longhorns on the offensive side of the football. I think you need to control time of possession. You need to keep things easy for this offense. If this offense does not run the ball as well on first down, they don't get into third and shorts. Instead, if they're getting into third and longs, you put your quarterbacks into a disadvantage at that point in time. So playing well in the early downs, I think, is going to be ultra key for the Michigan Wolverines in this football game. I want to rewind one more time to that USC-LSU game. I mentioned it once before in this preview. I want to mention it one more time. I was curious how D'Anton Lynn had soft coverage and keeping everything in front of him. He kind of played off a little bit. I'm curious to see. I know Wink Martindale is a more aggressive defensive coordinator, but I'm curious to see if Michigan schemes up that coverage where it says, we don't want to allow any big plays over the top. Let's limit things, see if we can make some stops in the red zone. Let's bend but don't break. Maybe we can force a couple of turnovers, give our offense a short field. Donovan Edwards really needs to have a great game in this one. I guess Khalil Mullins could have a great game as well, but I'm specifically looking at Donovan Edwards in this game. Because when you look at Donovan Edwards historically, he shows up for games like these, doesn't he? He shows up for games against Ohio State. He shows up for national championship games against Washington. When the big bright lights are on, there won't be lights because the sun is going to be out. It's in the afternoon. It's at noon after all. But in this type of environment, this is when the Don really comes into play. Can Michigan get a couple of those big Donovan Edwards runs, force some turnovers? That seems to be the formula. And keeping those big plays in front of them, that seems to be the formula to be able to go toe-to-toe with the Texas Longhorns. I think that this is going to be a challenge for Michigan. I think they need to win the battle in the trenches, both on offense and on defense. They need to drag Texas down to their level. If we start to see Texas in a rhythm and we start to see points on the board, this Michigan team is not really built to come back from behind. So they need to jump on the horns early, I think, to really have to be in an advantageous spot. If Michigan is able to do that early, get on the board early, keep Texas contained, I think you get them into the fourth quarter with a 3-point lead or a 7-point lead if you're the Maize and Blue. Give yourself a chance to just make a few plays down the stretch. And the question, of course, when you try to pick a winner or you try to really evaluate this matchup, when you see a game like this, is just Texas more talented? Do they just have more pieces that even if Michigan can drag them down and try to get them into that type of scenario that I just laid out, is Texas just have that much more talent on offense that they're just going to be able to just make 1, 2, 3, 4 more plays during this game? That's just one thing that I've had in the back of my head, that kind of like whatever Michigan wants to do or whatever game plan they have or whatever situation that they want to get to late in this football game, does Texas just have more pieces on offense to be able to make those plays down the stretch? We're going to find out, but this is a very intriguing game, certainly for me. And if Michigan is able to pull out this victory, a lot of people kind of backing off Michigan. They dropped one spot in the AP poll to number 10. Now, if they're able to get this win, I think that says a lot about Sharon Moore. I think it says a lot about this football program, and you're kind of riding the roller coaster a little bit in this first half of the season. But it would be a big statement victory if they do end up on the short end of the stick against a national championship contender like the Texas Longhorns. I certainly don't think it's the end of the world as well. All right, let's get into our second game that we want to preview in this one as well. This one is one of my favorites. It is Cy-Hawk time. Man, this game exists within its own universe, man. Just because you win this game doesn't mean that you're going to win 7, 8, 9 games during the season. Just because you lose this game doesn't mean that you're going to have an average or poor year the rest of the year. That's what makes this game so fun, living in its own universe. And this is a very interesting and heated rivalry in the state of Iowa between the Hawkeyes and the Cyclones as well. Let's dive into the matchup and the storylines that exist within the specific showdown. Let's start first with Iowa State. Okay, when you look at their offense, little bit of an inconsistent run game last season. Some games it was good, maybe some other games it wasn't so good. I think as this season went on, once Iowa State got past this game last year, Rocco Becht really started to improve at the quarterback position, game by game by game. And now I think that's the strength of this Iowa State offense, is Rocco Becht's ability to push the football down the field to guys like Jalen Noel. 8 catches, 135 and a score in week number 1 for Jalen Noel. So that's going to be the big focus, I think, for Phil Parker and this Iowa defense. Can Iowa win the battle up front and just get pressure with their front four? Like, that's a defensive coordinator's dream. I've said that before here this season, that if they can get pressure up front with Ethan Hurkett, with Aaron Graves, with Y.A. Black, with Deontay Craig, and get into the face of Rocco Becht, it allows Phil Parker to do so many different things with his coverages. And we've seen it in this very game. Remember when Brock Purdy a couple of years back, interception after interception after interception. You saw last season what Sebastian Castro was able to do in this football game. This game lately for the Iowa Hawkeyes has been, and their ability to win these games has been their ability to create turnovers. Getting in the face of Rocco Becht, disrupting this Iowa State passing game, I think gives Iowa a tremendous advantage in this game. If Rocco has time, and if he's able to sit back there, I know this secondary is really, really good for Iowa, but he might be able to find some spots. He might be able to convert a 3rd and 5. He might be able to convert a 3rd and 6 or 7, keep the chains moving, and then that maybe gets Iowa just a little bit off balance. I don't think there's going to be a ton of scoring in this football game. Okay, I think your possessions are going to be very valuable, which I think favors the Iowa Hawkeyes certainly in this matchup. Let's talk about Iowa, specifically their offense. They put up not 5, not 10, not 15, but 40 points in week number 1 against, it was the Redbirds of Illinois State. It didn't start off too well. Started off a little bit sluggish, didn't it? But it was like that analogy that I made on Twitter. It was a little bit like that pull start lawnmower. You pull it once, wasn't there. You pull it twice, it wasn't there. But once you got it started, that thing started to get humming. And once you're pushing and you mow a few rows of your lawn, okay, now it's running good. And now you kind of see what this Tim Lester offense can certainly be. I think a key for the Iowa Hawkeyes is going to be their run game. Tim Lester said it before the season. We have to be a team that needs to run the football. And they've got 4 running backs that can legitimately get in there and run the football. You saw what Caleb Johnson was able to do, breaking out some big runs in week number 1 in that game. Of course, Kamari Moulton, the redshirt freshman, was the starter. So I think rotating backs, keeping them fresh, and being able to go right at Iowa State's defense, it's going to open up the pass game down the field. We saw what Reese Vanderzee was able to do in week 1. We saw what Jacob Gill was able to do in week 1. I think a big key to this one not only is the return of Kirk Ferentz, who I think is going to be very motivated in this game. He's always motivated, of course, when he takes on the Iowa State Cyclones to notch up another win for the black and gold. But I think he's going to be motivated to see another guy that was out week 1, and that's Caleb Brown, come in and have a big game here against Iowa State. Now, all of a sudden, in week 1, you were able to build some confidence with those 2 receivers I just talked about. Reese Vanderzee, and Jacob Gill. You add Caleb Brown. You got 2 tight ends in Luke Lachey and Addison Estranga. I talked about the depth in the running back room. The offensive line looks pretty good if you keep Cade McNamara upright and you keep Cade McNamara healthy. All of a sudden, things are coming together. This is where we go back to not overreacting, but we take a look at week 1 and just that confidence that was needed for Iowa. So being able to run the football is so important. Then this is a good Iowa State defense. I want to get that, make sure that's out there. This is the top returning defense in the Big 12 from last season, and they return a lot of key parts from this team as well. But watch out for one key injury. Caleb Bacon at the linebacker spot will be out for a little bit for Iowa State. So that could be certainly something that could impact this game, specifically in the run game, right? One of those top guys from that linebacker spot that can try to come up and stop the run. So if they can establish that, I think it opens up the play action. It opens up so much down the field. But if Iowa State is able to go nose to nose and get on the other side of the line of scrimmage, and Iowa doesn't have as much success running the football, I think that's now you're leaning on the throw game. Now you're leaning on Cade McNamara. Can he convert some of those throws? We saw him throw it down the field pretty well against Illinois State. It's a completely different monster when you take on somebody like the Iowa State Cyclones. I look at this Iowa offense. This is the ultimate measuring stick, right? We talk about week 1 and not overreacting, like I mentioned before. But now you're going up against a team that has a pretty good defense in Iowa State, a rival. This is where we're going to really find out how good or not good, how much progress the Iowa Hawkeyes have made on the offensive side of the football. That's why I'm so curious to watch this game, because if Iowa goes out there and they put up 24 points, they put up 27 points, and they look fairly efficient against the defense like Iowa State, I think now maybe you need to start to look at this offense certainly a little bit different. And I think you need to start to look at this Iowa football team a little bit different going forward, because if you can combine, like USC, right? You look at their competent defense and now the combination that can become. Now if you have a competent offense that proves it against a capable defense, and you combine it with what Iowa has on the defensive side of the ball, all of a sudden that's coming together pretty nicely, isn't it? All of a sudden you're feeling pretty good about the Iowa Hawkeyes now being a team that can get it done on all 3 phases: offense, defense, and special teams. Ultimately, I think this game comes down to the defenses. I think this game comes to which defense can make more plays in the end. And when it comes to making plays, specifically in this matchup, I think Iowa has that advantage. I think they have that advantage. I think they can get pressure. We'll see how much, but I think they can get pressure on Rocco Becht. I think they can force some turnovers, put their offense into more favorable situations. This is a series where Iowa has performed well more than not. I think Iowa State is one of the 10 or 11 teams maybe that could win, or the Big 12, or I should say get to the Big 12 championship game in Arlington this season. But I think when it comes down to it, Iowa is just a more complete team right now for Iowa State. But I would be very surprised if this is not a one-possession, 10-point game in the fourth quarter. I think that this is going to be a close game. I would be surprised if this game is like a couple of years ago, when College Game Day was there for Iowa and Iowa State, and Iowa just runs away with it. I'd be surprised at that result. I think this is going to be a tough, physical game. It is going to challenge Iowa both on offense and defense as well. But limiting those plays over the top from this Iowa State passing game is going to be the key. I think Iowa is able to get it done, but a challenging game against their in-state rivals. All right, man. Week 2, it's starting to be here. We got a big Week 2 here on Big Nation. Coming up on Thursday's show, we're going to be talking Kansas and Illinois. Kansas is a ranked team. Illinois coming off a lot of confidence in week number 1. And then we're finishing things off with a doozy. Nebraska and Colorado. We are going to be previewing that on Thursday's show as well. Remember, folks, don't overreact to week 1. Hell, don't even overreact to week 2. But also, don't just push aside or ignore what you see on the football field. Until next time, until Thursday, until the next Big Nation, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.